my name is Jen Puma. I am from the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation, and I am your moderator for this session. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's FormFest 2023 session. This is titled Demos, Unemployment Insurance Forms and Rules as Code. I know folks have been sharing their formative form stories. The quick-ish one that I will share has to do with helping my 75-year-old mother recently navigate the getting called for jury duty and having to fill out a juror questionnaire, same form that everybody fills out when they get summoned to jury duty. And it was really challenging for her this time around. She really wanted to do it in paper and not create like a login and do two-factor authentication. She lives in New Jersey. For the New Jersey folks, maybe if you have any tie-in with the courts, you can help them make that process a little bit easier. But there was it was like a fraught process for her as an older person trying to fill out the form this time around. So as her daughter, I was also her resident tech expert and just helped her navigate the form. So that is just a snippet into my form story, my formative form story. So we really want to jump into today's content. It's going to be fantastic. This is a 1-hour session. We have 2 exciting demos. Our first team of speakers is from the New Jersey Office of Innovation, and they will present for 20 minutes, and then we'll pass it to our second team of speakers from right here at the Beeck Center, the Digital Benefits Network. So happy to be with my colleagues. And we're going to save the last 20 minutes for a joint Q&A with our 2 speaker teams. So if you have questions during the presentation or the Q&A period, please use the chat box to submit those. I want to call out my partner in crime here, Joel, who is moderating the chat and will be scooping up those questions for our Q&A portion. And we'll be sure to read those questions out loud so that they get captured in the recording along with the answers for posterity. So we are going to get started with our first demo. It is titled Improving User Experience on a Legacy UI Claimant System. I'm going to turn the session over to Sunny, Noah, Naman, Amy, Janice, and Ruthie, who are going to get us started first with their formative form stories. So to do that, I'm going to leave the session, but I'm right here and turn it over to the New Jersey team.
Thanks, Jen, for the recommendation on jury duty. Noted. We have a big team, so I think we'll put our formative form stories in the chat instead so we can spend time on our presentation. But thank you all so much for being here. Thanks to Code for America and the Beeck Center for bringing us together today, including Ariel and Tina, our co-presenters here at the session, and to all the other speakers and everyone in the chat for insightful thoughts and questions. We're so excited. Today we'll be talking about design in the front, legacy in the back, how we turned a legacy claim status form into an accessible, actionable information hub. To introduce my team and who's here at the presentation with us today. So I'm Ruthie. I work in a product role. We have Janice and Amy on our design and research team, and Naman, Sunny, and Noah from our engineering team. We work on unemployment insurance modernization, and we sit between the Office of Innovation for the state of New Jersey and the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization at the New Jersey Department of Labor. We collaborate across the state to streamline and simplify access to benefits and services for residents through technology, product, human-centered design, and more. To contextualize our talk just a little bit, access to unemployment insurance always comes up as a key issue during recessions, and this came up more strongly than ever during the pandemic when so many people were trying to receive unemployment insurance benefits and faced tremendous burden to doing so. Today, we'll talk through a claim status form that got stood up during the pandemic and what we've been able to do with it since. And to begin talking through that, I'll hand it over to Janice and Naman.
Hi. So let's just take a look at this. Basically, this was spun up during the pandemic because of the flood of people who were applying and also trying to figure out where their status was. As you can see, there are 8 required fields to get into here, and that was not a mistake. That was actually intentionally done. I don't even know if the first one was shorter than this, but they put this up here in order to slow down the process of getting in because the servers were crashing as claimants were trying to come in to see where their claim was. And we did some investigation on this. Obviously, even, our team just trying to get into here, it was really difficult to get it all right the first time. You can see the enter and clear buttons are switched in the way of movement. There's just a lot of error moments here. And while we investigated a little bit more, we also found that the email and first and last name were not required in order to get in here from an authentication perspective of what the system actually needed. So that was some research that we did in terms of getting in, that we were like, hey, we should probably fix this now that we have some space and energy to do this. The next slide. So when you actually get into the portal too, another piece of our research from a UX perspective was the page doesn't actually change from the upper portion. So many people, even when you are successful in getting in, you're really unsure whether or not you made it, right? And so everything below that you see is the thing that changes. And so now you're looking at your claim status and also actions that you can take. It just so happened that as we were launching the pandemic waiver applications, overpayment waiver applications, that we started to get, we saw 20,000 requests come in where only 6,000 of them actually had an overpayment piece of their puzzle. So just looking at the UX of how these checkboxes were working, I just want you to focus a little bit on the self-service area. This UX flow with the checkbox is incredibly difficult to kind of know intuitively that you're even going to get anywhere if you check the box. And if you look at that schedule appointments online, that's actually a link to another place where that you can schedule an appointment online. But just from a composition perspective, you can also see how confusing that would be because that actually looks like a subtitle to some extent. So we took a lot of these learnings and redesigned something very quickly with the templates that we had in New Jersey, and we kind of took it to here. And Nauman, you can take over.
Yeah. So on the right, you see our first iteration of the redesigned form. And the first big thing to point out here is that we were able to go from the 8 fields to the 2. So we cut out the need to write in your confirmation for every single field. And then we also took out the name and email because those weren't actually needed in order to get somebody their status. So we were able to simplify the input and hopefully make it much faster for people to access the information, as well as just less of a cognitive load when you're trying to figure this out. And then for these inputs specifically with the social security and the date of birth, we were able to pull in the New Jersey web design system, which is based off of the US web design system, to use the best practices and patterns they've come up with around how to input this sort of personal information in ways that help or are in line with the type of research they've done about what is the easiest way to think of these sorts of information. And another thing to highlight here is that we were able to improve the page hierarchy by moving the user into a new page when they're going to see their status, so that it's a little bit clearer that something has changed after they've logged in, rather than keeping the user on the same page. The most important information, which is what is the status, has it been filed or not, the date of the claim, is now highlighted in this blue box to make this information more prominent. In the old version, it was getting hidden inside of this large block of text. And then as you can see on the bottom, there's these actions. These are the self-service options that used to be those checkboxes. So each one, reset your PIN, download your 1099G, they've all been brought into accordions that have their own forms that make it much clearer around what you need to fill in and when the action has been completed or not. And then one final thing I'll note, a big benefit of using this design system is that, one, we were able to improve the accessibility of the form. So our Lighthouse score for accessibility went from 65 to 100, which made it easier for people to access the form with their screen reader or keyboard. I do want to note the caveat, though, that just because we got to 100 doesn't mean that accessibility work is done. That's more of the starting point or the baseline to know that now is the point where we can actually test it with users and make sure that it's doing the rest of the work there. And then another good thing with the design system is that it has mobile friendliness built into a lot of the components. So we were able to make this website mobile friendly now. And we know, especially in New Jersey, I think about 60 to 70% of users are accessing these websites from their phones. And from an equity perspective, this is especially important because we know that underserved communities are more likely to be accessing government websites from their phone because of either not having broadband access or not having a personal computer at home. So we were able to improve in that sense. So this was all just putting the claim status page at parity with the old one, but we were hoping to continue to iterate on this and address other pain points related to status.
So we launched the claim status page, and we actually had a feedback form at the bottom of this page. You can see at the top right here, it's in line. We're asking folks, did you find what you were looking for? This is because in the spirit of being agile and iterative, we wanted to measure our success of this page through New Jersey resident feedback. And so we were collecting both qual and quant feedback. And so if a resident said no, we actually branched it into an open field qual question asking them why. And so we were collecting this feedback for a couple of months, and then we synthesized that using ChatGPT. One thing to note here, we actually scraped PII data before putting it into ChatGPT, but we used that as a way to combine that with user research we were doing on the ground, along with this synthesis to prioritize what's next for our team. What are new features that we need to build based on the pain points we were still hearing from our residents?
So through that process of collecting feedback from claimants, we identified a few major pain points that we wanted to work to address. We found specifically that there was a lot of, lack of clarity around identity verification and e-adjudication. And so we added alerts on the same claim status page that would put claimants' identity verification status and any e-adjudication cases that they had open front and center. So for identity verification, you can see an example of that on the left-hand side, for e-adjudication on the right-hand side. And you'll notice that both of the new alerts that we've added have buttons that will take users to a new link where they can take real action to move forward and to kind of get their get things moving along. So not only providing that information, but helping with the process.
Yeah, so now I just want to touch on the type of approaches that make this possible. So redesigning a form is only going to be as successful as the environment that you're doing it in and the processes that make that easy. So when you're redesigning a legacy website, you can run into a lot of issues. So we were not able to directly change the code on that old form in order to improve the design. Some reasons included that this was an on-premise system using relatively brittle and older systems that we didn't have as much experience with. We also just didn't have access to the code base, and that was taking a long time in order to even get into the place. So what we did as a workaround was to build something called a wrapper API. And for the engineers here, we basically used a web scraper to access the old claim status website. We pretend to visit it with the browser and log in to get whatever information we need. And then we return it back in API format. So this allows us to decouple our work with the old website by creating this API and then create a brand new front-end website that uses the tools we want and can be completely separate from needing to touch the old one. This was really useful because it allowed us to iterate much more quickly. It allowed us to use tools such as the New Jersey web design system, which wouldn't have been as easy on an older system.
Another of the benefits of our new page and our new approach is that we were able to integrate with some third-party APIs. So we started by adding single sign-on. So where previously claimants could only log in using their social security number and date of birth, now we had an email login as well. And that actually opened the door to us being able to address some of the other concerns that we had seen. So for example, we realized that claimants were running into a lot of roadblocks surrounding identity verification, as we had mentioned before. And we realized that a lot of that was, there was an uncertainty around whether someone has completed verification, whether they haven't. There wasn't a clear way to take action on that. And we realized that we had information on who had and hadn't completed this process directly tied to email logs that we had been keeping. We have been sending emails to people who have completed verification saying, congratulations, you know, you finished this, you can move along with the process. And so based on what claimants we had emails for, if that was tied to their SSO login, we could show them on their page, hey, congratulations, you've completed this, or show them the alert that we had displayed before saying, this is something you can take action on now.
Wrap up. I want to start with a quick recap. In the last year, we were able to successfully overhaul the design and implementation of the legacy claim status form, and we transformed it into this accessible and actionable portal for claimants to easily track the status of their claim and respond to certain action items. And under the hood, we designed a lightweight and flexible architecture that allows us to continue to scale and iterate based off of user feedback. So we have some few key takeaways here that we learned throughout the process that we want to share. The first thing is that there are many ways to accomplish what we accomplished here. When working with a legacy system, you have to meet the system where it's at. So you have to be tool agnostic when it comes to what's available at your disposal to use. The solution that we described was a result of that process, and we don't want this solution to be seen as entirely prescriptive, as in like, this is what you have to do when integrating with the legacy system. It's rather an example of a repeatable pattern that you can use to integrate with any other legacy system. We made these choices and these decisions through an agile process of iteration. And so that's, you know, letting the resident data and feedback guide our prioritization of the different approaches and solutions. And a part of that iterative process is continuously reevaluating the approach. Every decision we made throughout this had some kind of trade-off to it, whether we're, you know, if we're going to focus on group A, that means, you know, area B might not have our full attention. And we just need to make sure that all of those choices and decisions are made with intention. And when working quickly with this approach, it's also important to build trust, both internally with the team and externally with our partners. Our first release took much longer. It took about 4 months than our fourth release down the line, which took about 1 month. And we think this can be attributed to all the effort we put in to build trust with our partners at New Jersey's Department of Labor. We also want to highlight here that any success, no matter how small, should be celebrated and shared collectively with the entire team. When we're iterating and releasing so quickly and incrementally, it could be easy for these accomplishments to get lost. So with all of these learnings and all these techniques, we were able to get the solution out in this new redesign and iterate over it multiple times in the course of 1 year. So the next slide has a nice timeline visualization. I'll pass back to Ruthie.
Yeah, so I'll leave this up here for a second so people can take a look. And that just about wraps it up for our journey on the unemployment insurance claim status page. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining, and looking forward to talking through this further during the question session.
Yeah, thank you, New Jersey team. There's been some great comments and kudos for you guys in the chat, and we're pulling the great questions that have come so far. So we're going to get ready now to turn it over to our next team, Ariel Kennan and Tina Amper. They are going to do a demo titled "More Than Just a Pretty Form, The Importance of Rules as Code." So with that, I'm going to turn it over to y'all.
Thanks so much, Jen, and thank you, our colleagues in New Jersey. It's an honor to share the digital stage with you all. We're big fans of the incredible work you've been doing over there. It's nice to meet everyone who's joining us watching today. My name is Ariel Kennan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a fellow and research faculty member here at the Beeck Center who leads our digital benefits network, which we'll tell you more about. My background is doing design and product work in nearly all the sectors, and it's been a pleasure to now be working in academia and really working to support other practitioners across the country and world who are trying to do similar work. I'll pass to Tina.
Thanks, Ariel. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tina Amper. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the community advisor for the Rules as Code community of practice at the Digital Benefits Network. So I'm going to talk about a brief overview about the Beeck Center and the Digital Benefits Network. The Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation is a nonprofit, philanthropically funded organization at Georgetown University. We bring together students, expert practitioners, and extended networks to work on projects that solve societal challenges using data, design, technology, and policy. Our projects test new ways for public and private institutions to leverage data and analytics, digital technologies, and service design to help more people. You can learn more about us at beckcenter.georgetown.edu and follow us on Twitter, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn at the Beeck Center. And so with that, the Digital Benefits Network is a project of the Beeck Center. We convene practitioners who work in and alongside every level of government to spark dialogue, share resources, and support better digital delivery of public benefits and services in the U.S. We work across programs for food and shelter, for food and nutrition. So public benefits in the U.S., for those of us in the U.S., these are like SNAP and WIC. SNAP is a U.S. government program that provides food benefits to low-income families. So again, the Digital Benefits Network works around programs for food and nutrition like SNAP, WIC, health, such as Medicaid and CHIP, cash assistance, childcare, and unemployment insurance. You can learn more about our programming, newsletters, and research on our website, digitalbenefitsnetwork.org. Ariel?
Thanks, Tina, for that introduction. One area of our research at the Digital Benefits Network over the past few years has been exploring benefits eligibility rules as code and the possibility of having national, standardized, and open eligibility rules. So instead of talking much about the front end of forms in our talk today, we're going to talk about the back end logic that transforms the policy or legislation into the software. And the backend's actually equally as important if we want user-friendly forms. However, I will say there's only so much we can solve for at the software level in the inherent complexity of the policy of these types of programs. But we believe we can improve the transparency, efficiency, and even open new possibilities in service delivery if the code for the rules is standardized and open. So in our research, we've been asking questions like, what if many forms could utilize shared code? So for example, what if multiple states, counties, and nonprofits could use centralized computer consumable code to power their individual forms? Or what if all coded rules utilized a standard format in which each form would have its own system, but there could be a data standard and rules documentation that each system could then absorb? Many of you have actually probably been handling this type of logic to power your forms. And in the past few years, there's been an international movement and terminology around rules as code that has arisen to help categorize that type of work. When I was working in government starting about a decade ago, we definitely were working with this type of logic and this code with eligibility rules, and rules as code was not a term that we ever used. But I was really pleased a couple years ago to read this incredible report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, that defines rules as code as an official version of the rules, e.g. laws and regulations, in a machine consumable form, which allows rules to be understood and actioned by computer systems in a consistent way. You can access this report at the link that's here or use the QR code. So let's try this concept out across a benefits use case. So every day, millions of people across the United States are using digital systems to find out if they're eligible for programs and then apply, enroll, and manage their benefits. And in order to implement those digital systems, software developers and sometimes program and policy teams interpret the laws, regulations, and policy documents into computer code. And while that might sound straightforward, in actual implementation, it requires going to many sources, a tangled mess of rules that often even conflict with each other across programs, and then also vary by state. And they also require an immense amount of interpretation of the goals in a policy as it transforms into that code. Not to mention, in the United States, this effort is duplicated across locales, organizations, for literally every digital system for benefits access. So surely there must be a different way. So what might this look like in practice? Let's imagine a rules as code approach adopted by the US federal government for public benefits programs based on some ideas documented in some of our earliest rules as code research, which focuses on the US, but significantly borrows from international ideas as well. So what if legislators, administrators, and software developers could work together to write official US federal government computer consumable code versions of those program eligibility requirements, including those state-specific rules alongside the legal or human-readable counterpart? To improve the ability for non-technical stakeholders to better understand the code, the federal government could also issue logic flows in plain language to accompany the code. And then any stakeholder can review the legislation or regulation, the plain language logic, and the code side by side and know that all are official and ready for implementation. There could also be a continuous cycle to write, revise, and test the rules to ensure accuracy. And then states, territories, tribes, counties, municipalities, service providers, everyone who builds these systems could implement accurate, efficient rules and keep them up to date in their digital eligibility and enrollment systems. So let's play that out a little bit using some actual rules. This is using a SNAP rule from New York on income eligibility calculations. And on the left, we see that official SNAP rulebook regulation around income calculations. In the middle, we see a logic chart that was developed by the team at the New York City Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity. And then on the right, we see computer consumable code that powers the Access NYC eligibility screening tool. And finally, the front end form that the resident sees when they're actually screening for benefits. And so those things all work in complement to each other and are all open. So some of the value add around rules as code for beneficiaries includes increasing predictability, transparency, and cross-benefit access. For government and delivery organizations, we believe it can help increase efficiency by eliminating those duplicative efforts. It can help reduce ambiguity in that interpretation of policy as it's written into code for those digital systems. Ideally, it can also allow the creation of feedback loops and hopefully enable powerful new tools to assist policymakers and legislators in modeling and measuring impacts of policy changes. So we build the sharing of broad resources and supporting community into all of our research. So I wanted to share some more of those resources that are available to all of you and an invitation for continued collaboration in our work. So the Digital Benefits Hub, if you haven't been there already, has a page dedicated to digitizing policy and rules as code. There you'll find our research and research from around the world, examples, code repositories, case studies, videos, and we're always looking for new submissions if there's anything you see that we have not already included on there. We've been researching and writing about rules as code for about 2 years now, starting with our first paper that was published in February of last year. We also hosted a really fun Rules as Code demo day last summer that has 8 demos from US and international examples. You can find those videos on the Digital Benefits Hub. And then we followed with 2 shorter form reports that cover many of the concepts I just went over. And in June, we published a new brief with the Massive Data Institute, which is also part of Georgetown, exploring how rules are currently communicated for SNAP by federal, state, and nonprofit organizations, and then how to build off of current projects and frameworks to advance a shared standard for benefits eligibility rules as code. And in that report, we have included code snippets from projects with open source rules. So in this example that's shown here, which is actually the same rule we were looking at previously around SNAP rule for income, it shows several different projects and different frameworks taking that same logic and showing how it's coded in each of those systems. So in our research, we're continuing to explore existing frameworks for potential reuse. We want to make sure whatever we work on going forward, that we've really fully investigated if we can build off something that already exists before we build something new. And we want to be confident that a framework can support the operational changes needed to publish and absorb rules as code. And after today, if you are someone who works on benefits eligibility enrollment systems, we'd love to continue our dialogue with you on those systems. And we know that those systems are understandably very sensitive, but we'd like to work closely with you to better understand how they operate and hopefully co-create with you how they might evolve in the future. And I'm going to pass to Tina to close us out. Oh, Tina, you're on mute.
Hi there. So thank you, Ariel. Would love to get all of you, those who are interested, to get involved with us. We have been in close contact with our practitioners who are working inside and alongside government on benefits eligibility. And based on their feedback, this is how we have continued our research and are now building a community of practice. For those of you who are working in this space, we hope our collaborative efforts benefit your work and most of all, the people seeking benefits. We appreciate your feedback and support moving forward and hope that you find peers within our Rules as Code community who are advancing similar work. This fall, we conducted a survey with our grassroots technical community and conducted 2 government-only roundtables to better understand how you are or could be operationalizing rules as code. We aim to share insights from the survey and the roundtable discussions next month in December, so watch out for that. Additionally, we plan to have another a gathering of all the practitioners in all sectors and have another roundtable in early 2024. So if you're interested in the community of practice, please fill out the brief form available at beckcenter.org/RAC, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Okay, so I want to talk about proof of concept. So somehow my notes got. So we'd like to test the rules as code approach for multiple federal benefits programs in collaboration with various states, territories, tribes, counties, municipalities, federal agencies, and delivery organizations in the US. And by testing and measuring how the proof of concept is working, we can inform how to scale to a national approach. Please be in touch if this is of immediate interest to you. Ariel, do you have anything else to add?
That's all. I'm seeing a note in chat here that beckcenter.org/RAC doesn't work, but the capitals should work just fine. I was trying to switch windows to check that, but.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Jen, we're ready for Q&A.
Yeah, I gotta love this lag when I resume sharing of my audio and video. It's a real nail biter. I'm actually gonna ask you guys to stay on sharing for Q&A and welcome back our New Jersey team members. Welcome you guys to share your audio and video. We've had some great questions coming in the chat. Some questions have been answered by the New Jersey team already. I'm going to do a little bit of jumping around. We have a really healthy amount of time for Q&A. At 3:05, the session will go till 3:30. So Jewel is going to continue to moderate the chat and pull any other questions. So feel free to keep putting questions into the chat, even now that we're in Q&A. And I will get started with a couple of questions that have been asked but not yet answered yet. So I'll go in reverse order and start with the DBN team. So let's see. David Sloan had asked, can you expand on the vision in terms of the infrastructure or practices that would be required for states to implement or absorb RAC? For instance, states would need databases, portals, APIs, et cetera, but would need the flexibility for newly promulgated rules to be integrated without massive changes to those other aspects.
Hi, David. It's good to see you on here. I think this is one of the questions that we're exploring. I think, we've been able to look at kind of the deepest on some of the more nonprofit or like grassroots products that are out there because they have open source code. And one of the things that's very clear from looking at those is that no one's even coding those products the same way. Everyone's using different frameworks. They're using different languages. There's no standard. And I don't think there's any way we would ever get, let alone those organizations, to adopt a new way of writing their code entirely or using specific languages. And the same thing for government, that's just not gonna be the way. And so we've been looking more at, could a data standard for rules documentation be the way to proceed, so that could you go from a standard notation or documentation to then be able to translate that into your own code? So there's still some obviously interpretation that's happening there, but at least it's from like code to code instead of like English to some form of code many times over. But these are the kind of questions that we're wanting to go a lot deeper in with states and local governments and counties, et cetera, over the coming year to really understand what tech stack those systems are really in. There's not a lot of information about a lot of those systems readily available. Most of them are just kind of like black boxes, sometimes for good reason, but we're hoping that we can also help encourage states to be more transparent in those systems, but wanting to really understand more about how states are going from policy into code and what infrastructure and practices are currently being used. Like I said, we've documented that in some of our other research pretty extensively for these other products, and through our community of practice and then our proof of concept work next year, we'll be testing that out. So would love to keep talking to you about that. I know you're in the DBN world.
Thank you, Ariel. And on the kind of technical track, Alexis Shoemaker had asked, what other RAC frameworks are you currently researching? Any outside of the benefit space?
Yeah, we are looking at the benefit space, and give me just a minute, I'll grab you the link. Our report from June actually has a table of frameworks that we're exploring, and we also have purposely put that up actually as an Airtable base so we can keep adding to it. So if you see something on there that's not in there, we would love to add it. And we've analyzed kind of strengths and weaknesses to those frameworks. There are some parallels in like health informatics that are helpful. There's also an international standard that's called Open FISCA, which was originally developed for France. And it was for their tax law and legislation. They have benefits eligibility screening built on top of that, but it's benefits at a national level. And there's been some experimentation. 18F actually used that framework to build a prototype looking at SNAP eligibility a few years ago, but hit some limitations with it as well. And so we're wanting to keep pushing on that of like, is it an adaptation of Open FISCA or is it borrowing from some of these other tools? And so we're talking to those folks, but would love to hear more ideas. But I'll drop that link in the chat here in a minute.
Thank you. And John Dunning had asked if there's any early experiments with using generative AI to convert legislation to code at this point.
John Dunning, do you want to come do that experiment with us? I think some people have been playing with this. I've seen some really fun stuff too done with looking at even just like application instructions. And so can you like help people navigate forms and understand and like even help government write that in plain language. I think there's a lot of potential for this. And I actually saw, I'll drop this link to a former colleague of mine just did an experiment looking at actually like signs that are in the built environment and turning those into code. And I was like, oh, that's rules as code, but it's like from the built environment. That's super cool. So I think there's a lot of potential there to write summaries and generate code off of legislation. But I think would be all the stronger with a standard notation and format behind it so that you know and can like more easily validate that that's an accurate representation. John says sure.
Ariel, the June report, is it June 2023 that you wanted to mention?
I was just going to grab the link for it.
Oh, okay, got it.
Great. There is a question for the New Jersey folks, but I'm going to throw one last more general question to the DBN team before we move over to this question for New Jersey. So the more general question for the DBN team is from Jesse Gardner. And apologies if there was maybe just some of your content was missed, but could you just either recap or talk about the connective tissue between legislation, plain language, and then code, how those things fit together? So just more of a basic primer.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the vision is that, you know, legislation can be hard and regulations can be hard to interpret. I mean, we know they're often written in legalese English. And so even that is not always like a very plain representation, although I think there's a lot of people working to make legislation much easier to understand. But having obviously the thing that's coded in the actual law or regulation or guidance, and then starting to turn that more into a logic flow. So even thinking about like, if this statement, then that statement, and things that might be in an equation with each other, especially when you're looking at some of the calculations that go into the benefits programs for calculating income, household size, expenses, things like that. I've started to use more of a visual notation that can help you follow that, and can also then help be a tool as kind of the intermediary step before you then go into code, so that you have, you know, a step you've gone through where you're trying to put that into what would then be actually into the logic that is the code itself. There's a lot of opportunities too to think about things like rules engines and other tools that help you use, like reuse statements and calculations across different pieces of rules, but that's kind of the even further beyond. We talk about that in some of our reports, but I tend to not talk about it in kind of the top level presentation.
Great. So I'm going to lob a question over to the New Jersey folks. It's a technical question. Is your API wrapper source code public, or a technical write-up or blog post? I think it's a great example of working with and around a legacy system, and would love to share your story with people. And that was from Daniel Dufour. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks for shouting that out. It's good to hear that it's applicable to other teams. Right now, the source code is not public, but I think it's a great idea to write up a blog post and give examples of the code that allowed us to make that possible. So it's definitely been an item that we've been thinking about in the last month or two.
Super, thank you. There were a couple of other questions for the New Jersey team that the New Jersey team kindly answered in the chat. Since we have the time, I'm just going to do a quick summary for folks to hear, because there's a lot in the chat and you might lose some of it. So quickly, Mary Lewis had asked about your survey tool, if it was existing or not. or built from scratch. And so the team answered that it was indeed built from scratch. And they did that because they wanted a lot of control over how the data is stored and what the UX is. Luke Short had asked how you scrape PII and how can you ensure that 100% of the PII is removed? That's a great question. And John Dunning piled on that with how do you scrape it so Amazon doesn't get it. So the team had answered that they were not trying to prevent Amazon from having PII access, but since they do store user data on an AWS and they have policies in place to do so securely, the PII data is processed by an AWS service, but it's encrypted at rest and in transit. So their main goals were just that one, any members of their team would be able to read feedback without seeing the PII. And then the second goal was that they could use third-party services aside from Amazon to analyze feedback without exposing PII to them. So it's a little bit about their privacy controls. And then this is a great question, and it's a more general question, but I think it's so important for this forum, is that Deanna Jurek had asked, in all caps, how can I do this in Washington? I don't currently work for the government and am beyond disgruntled at the experience and would volunteer my time to fix it. I think this is a great point. John Dunning had chimed in that there may be volunteer civic tech orgs in Washington that could help drive some of that. I believe that there is also volunteer work that can be done through, I don't know if it's USDR. Yeah, okay, I see folks shaking their, nodding. I'm not as clued in with all the work that USDR does, but I know they're volunteer-led or volunteer-driven. Does anyone else have more information on USDR that they can share? They want to chime in, any of our speakers? Okay, thanks. If nothing else, you'll have the website in the chat, Deanna. You can definitely check them out there. But any other voiceover around USDR from the speakers?
I volunteer USDR as a community manager, but they're open to any technologists, designers, content folks to work on specific projects for nonprofits and government projects. It's amazing.
Yeah, it looks like Ruthie's team actually collaborated on that. Can you say more?
Yeah, I'll just say that USDR has been an amazing partner for us on unemployment insurance modernization in New Jersey. One of the key areas that they've helped us with is Spanish translation and making sure our experience is accessible, informative, and useful in Spanish, and thinking of the different dialects and how we can make sure the questions really make sense as we revamp our intake application. And I also just share that some volunteers that we've had with USDR during the pandemic have joined our team full-time and are invaluable members of the Office of Innovation. So we're huge fans of USDR. And also just share, we were chatting a little about the wrapper API. Technically anyone could build a wrapper API as long as some requirements are met around, like the way you hit a government website, you won't, trigger, too much traffic to the site, or, get blocked by a, DDoS filter, something like that. But theoretically, a volunteer could build a version of this, show it to a program and see if that would be helpful to them, something like that. I don't know if anyone else on my team has other thoughts to share about that question. Thanks for the question, Deanna.
And I'll highlight that in the chat, Jewel put one other organization, Technologists for Public Good. They're a member association for technologists to network and information share, and they have a really active network of folks that are looking to connect. So that might just be another option for you, Deanna. Anytime someone says that they want to volunteer their time for government, it's worth spending a couple of extra minutes on that for good people who want to do good work. So it can't be understated. We have a couple of other questions that have come in for the DBN folks. So Ian, I hope I've said your name right, Ian Boyd, had asked, it's really great to see this. What appetite and capability do you see across states to adopt an RAC approach?
Tina, can I put you on the spot to share on our roundtable from last month at a high level?
Yes, so we had 2 roundtables. We had one specifically for state practitioners, state, local, tribal, territorial. And then we had a separate one for federal government practitioners. There's some sensitivities and the things they wanted to discuss, and that was the request that we had these small group discussions. So we limited that this roundtable for those specific practitioners. The federal one, we had probably 30 people with different government agencies, from including the Food and Nutrition Service. And then the state one was amazing and very big and different kinds of people, a lot of people using Civiform. The point for these roundtable discussions is for all of the practitioners to come together. And what they discovered in the state one was that we were asking them what were their challenges, and everyone was like +1, +1,000. So they found a group of people that were tackling the same problems they were, and it's always good to let them get to know each other and hopefully have little discussions, and then we're going to have another convening at the end of the year. I mean, at the beginning of next year.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, we hope there will be government participation in the proof of concept work. And so it's going to be a coalition of the willing. You know, we're not going to get all 50 states, but I hope that we get a variety of different states, different structures. Some states have their benefits combined different ways, et cetera. So that we're really pushing on some of the boundaries and trying out different things that work for different governments, and hopefully can be something we can, you know, iterate and scale over time to more places as they see it working.
So Ian, there were a bunch of states that were working together on the back end using Civiform. So that's the beginning of the sharing and the collaboration.
Fantastic. Viraj Mohan had asked, I guess this would be for Tina and Ariel. Do you have a link to 18F's findings on OpenFisca? If you can drop that in the chat, that would be great.
I put those in the response. Oh, I'm getting echo from somebody. I put those in the response. We have covered 18F's work, which was a prototype, which has not scaled in the last couple of years, actually, but it's all open documentation. So we have covered it extensively in our initial research. There's a case study. There's also a demo video on the hub from the designer and developer who partnered on that. And then it's covered very extensively in our June report as well, because it's one of the very few products that has fully open source eligibility rules. But knowing that it was a prototype, it's not, you know, in production, but a lot of that baseline code has been able to be used by other tools, including SnapScreener, which is a third-party product, and they were able to adapt that code into their code base, which has been a cool reuse to see as well.
Great. So we do have a couple more minutes. If you have other questions for our speakers, do put them in the chat. While we're waiting for any other questions to come in, Ruthie, I'll give you the floor for a moment to just talk about the hiring that's going on at the New Jersey Office of Innovation, because again, always great to get good people in government and spread the word.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll talk about some open roles at the Office of Innovation for the state of New Jersey, and also at the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization. And if you know anyone in your networks, please share the word, and we'd love to talk with anybody who's interested in learning more. So at the Office of Innovation, we're hiring a lot of roles. We're hiring a product data and analytics lead, a co-director of data and policy, a data and policy lead, so a lot of emphasis on that. We're also hiring a deputy chief of staff for our team, full stack engineers, product managers, and a talent lead. So anyone who wants to learn more about those, please feel free to reach out. And at the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization, we're hiring 2 really critical roles. One is a data and analytics lead, and one is a customer experience lead. So, you know, that is also a really exciting opportunity to take on, you know, kind of the program end to end, think about how data and analytics can shape that, and how, you know, we can think about customer experience effectively there. And there'll be a webinar to talk about those roles on November 15th. I linked everything about all of those roles in my comment in the chat. But again, please send any people who might be interested our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruthie. I had a question for the New Jersey team. Amy, when you were presenting, you had mentioned that you guys used ChatGPT, and I was just wondering then, does New Jersey have a policy on AI? Were you guys kind of like operating in a weird gray space, or was it really clear that you could use it for the use that you wanted to use it for? Anything you can expound on about like kind of the policy component of what you were allowed to do as you worked with generative AI, I think could be interesting since it's so cutting edge for so many organizations.
Yeah. I would say it's still pretty gray when it comes to AI and ChatGPT, but one thing I will mention is that Beth Novak, our leader, actually founded Innovate US. I think I got that name right. And they are spearheading all the AI that's being done in government and coming up with those principles and rules and like how to use it and leverage it as like a government official. And so we really look to that. But again, it's still a gray and ever-changing space day to day.
We actually just established an AI task force in New Jersey to help us understand how we can use AI responsibly in the state. So I linked an announcement in the chat about that and just linked an article as well. Obviously,
one thing,
right, and now I'm gonna continue.
I was just going to add one thing. We haven't released anything AI generated to actual users yet. We're being very careful about that. Right now, we're really trying to figure out if we can run experiments to see like how accurate is AI compared to humans to do certain tasks and get like a robust set of data on like, is it working or is it not? And Amy's example is an internal tool that we're using to test that out.
Thank you for that. We did have one more question come in from Daniel. He asked, how does RAC approach address edge cases? And so this will go, I believe, to the DBN team. So how might it address edge cases that might have been missed in the first time the rules were written? An example is refugees are technically eligible for benefits on day one, but sometimes have to wait up to 60 days for an SSN.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would still have to make it into the coded rules, but thinking about the rules being coded, formatted, and ideally in a place where they can actually be tested. There's a lot of human testing and validation that still goes on in these systems, and not as much automated testing as you might expect. And so one of the cool things that we're thinking about, and I haven't thought about this particular refugees use case, but just use cases in general and potentially edge cases too, is that when you have the rules in a way that you can model them, you can add rules into the system and then test it to see what the impact is on that system. So if you change a rule, you take a rule out, how does that start changing eligibility? There's a very cool demo that I can go grab that's on the hub. It uses the Atlanta Fed actually has the most comprehensive database of eligibility rules, and they use it for calculating benefits cliffs. So they're using it almost purely for like policy analysis and advocacy around benefits cliffs from a financial and economic perspective. They're not doing benefits eligibility screening on it. But MITRE actually built a tool using the policy rules database where they use census data, and they're actually using American Community Survey data. So you can actually run like massive amounts of data based on real families through the eligibility rules and see how that changes eligibility actually on like a county by county basis. And that tool's not out for public use or consumption. They're using it more in a research component, but that type of modeling is possible. And so you would be able to theoretically, if enough rules were modeled in a standard format and you could write software that then, runs process and tests of those tools, you could then test out things and then also see how a use case like adding refugee eligibility or even calculating maybe how many more people might be eligible for benefits, things like that, in a much ideally easier way than some of the more like the statistics and economics approaches that are currently used for that. There's a whole like world of policy analysis people who are super into the rules as code stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're just at the end of our session time. I want to thank you again to our attendees for joining, and a special thanks to the folks at the New Jersey Office of Innovation, as well as the Digital Benefits Network, for sharing your time and your expertise with us.